Today we're going to be talking about juvenile dependency courts, covering those courts as people trickle back in. And that's something that's clearly a hot topic now with there being a lot of movement in LA County, especially with Judge Nash issuing a blanket order to make the courts presumptively open to news media. This is something that's a very contentious issue, but it is also kind of critical to understanding what is possible when we have ethical coverage of the court. So we have two very good guests today. We've got Honorable Judge Teresa Guerrero Daly, who's just moved who's at the Superior Court in Santa Clara County, who's just moved out of juvenile courts into criminal courts, right?
Right, joint felony court.
So congratulations on that move, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you. And then we've got Karen Dessaw from the San Jose Mercury News, who I've been reading her work for years. I've never met her face to face, so this is very nice to see you as a human. Oh my God, it's very, very wonderful. So it's the first time I've seen you as a human and not just written words, Dessaw. You know, you guys all read her story from 2000, her series of stories from 2008, which were really a good example of media that can impel social change by virtue of just covering the issues, what can happen. So just as an announcement, at 7:30 we have another class coming in, so we need to kind of wrap up by 7:25. I know the students have all been kind of preparing with lots of questions. We've got some members of the public here also. Dobby, nice to see you. Rosa, nice to see you. Thanks for coming out. Reed, nice to see you. Edward, great to see you. And Sokum and Lily, wonderful to see you guys too. So without further ado, I'll invite up Judge Teresa Guerrero Daly. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, what I want to do is I want to give you a very brief overview, because I really want to have a dialogue with you, all right? And I know when I go to class, for me, that's what I take with me, especially the stories, the war stories. And let me start by letting you know that if you don't know much about dependency, I got to confess, as a lawyer going to law school, they never taught us dependency law. As a judge, I knew very little until I was assigned to dependency. And so it's really kind of a niche type of area of the law. Very, very important. But unfortunately, an area that few people really know about and understand until something happens, something terrible happens, and then there's some coverage. So I'm really glad to see that there's an interest here and for this opportunity to be able to share with you what dependency courts do. I'll start with the mission, which is
Is that a friend of yours, Judge?
Yeah, he's better looking, so just press this one. Okay. It really is to reunite families, so that everything that we do from the minute a petition gets filed, our objective, my objective as a judge, is to reunite the family. All right. Unlike a lot of people think it's that we're there to separate and take children from the parents. How do cases come to us? Many of them, I listed probably the four most frequent sources of how a case is filed. Usually a teacher, medical personnel, oftentimes it's involving perhaps domestic violence. So, all the mandated reporters call, and a social worker goes out to the scene and does an evaluation, and then if they decide they're going to take the child that same night, then within 48 hours I will see the petition, and it will be a hearing that I will have, and that's the beginning of evaluating a case that's coming to dependency. So that the stages, real quickly, the first is the removal. There's different options. A social worker doesn't have to remove the child if there's an alternative. And so now, by law, we're mandated to look for relatives, because it's less traumatic for a child to go stay with grandma or with aunt or even a neighbor than to be removed and be placed in a foster home that, you know, that they don't know the family. I was just talking to Rosa about, you know, I would say maybe 50–55% of the cases I had involved Latino children. So also it's a, you know, different culture, just total different strange setting. So that the removal, the formal removal after the physical is when that petition is filed. So the parents are notified, they have to be served with notice, and then they come into court. And I have what is called a prima facie hearing. Very, very little evidence has to be presented to find out whether these children are at risk. And if they are, you know, that is what I look at. If there's a risk these children may be harmed, then I will, you know, I will have the children removed. I will sustain not the petition, but the initial request to remove the child. The next phase then is, after the initial hearing, is what's called a jurisdiction. And that's kind of a mini trial, because at that point, the parents by then would have been appointed counsel, right? The average case, I had a case where there were as many as 10 different lawyers in that one case. But for the most part, we're talking about at least 4 lawyers. One for the child, one for the social worker, and one for each parent. So the parents don't get one lawyer, each one gets a lawyer. And like I said, it's like a mini trial. They have a right to present evidence, cross-examine witnesses. They have a right against self-incrimination. And so that after that trial, I will either sustain the allegations that the department, and the department is the Department of Family and Children's Services, each county calls them different names. And then I say, okay, there is a preponderance of the evidence to sustain the petition. And then we move forward to the disposition. So that the disposition will include things as, obviously, with the intent of we're going to reunify this family. And so we look at what kind of services are we going to provide so that they can reunify. And when we look at what are the reasons that for removal, how do I get the other little things to drop?
Probably press it, one will drop.
Okay.
Boom.
There we go. All right. So we have 80% are neglect. All right. Anywhere from, you know, the dirty home, children are being fed, they're not being sent to school, they're lacking in medical or dental care. That's the bulk of the cases that we see. And about 15% are the physical and sexual abuse cases. All right. And then there's a mixture of others. You know, give an example of what is in that 5%. I've had some children have been adopted, and then the parents decide they don't want them. So, you know, they bring them back. And yeah, I mean, I was horrified. First case I handled when, you know, this couple just said, we can't handle it. She was like 7 years old, right? So some of those fall into the other. What brings his children, what is the reason behind the issues that parents are facing? The vast majority is the drugs, you know. And I know I'm talking to a friend of mine who's, you know, a real activist. He told me, how can you even consider removing children just because people are doing drugs? And I understand why some people may have that perception. But when you start to look at what happens, especially with methamphetamine, because that's really the drug of choice in, you know, now in most of the country, we see cases where the 5-year-old is preparing the bottle of formula for the infant. We have children that are going to school without being fed, dirty. Then they start to become those pariahs that other kids don't want to be around. Their, you know, emotional, mental psyche starts to you know, be affected. And we see, you know, parents that will sleep 2, 3, you know, 4 days. So there's really more to the issue of drug dependency than just, you know, what people think it's a passing or a temporary stage. And of course, I'm talking about those parents that are abusing drugs every week. And like I said, they're either up 2-3 days and then they're down, completely down another 3-4 days. Domestic violence, another subject area. One thing I learned about domestic violence, because I was having a hard time finding out, well, how does that affect the children? Until the medical, field has taught us that there are real physical effects on children. Something that, really blew my mind, stunting of their growth, a physical stunting of their growth, which I never associated, not to mention the emotional and, in the cycle of violence that goes on. Lots of untreated mental health. And it's hard to distinguish what came first, the drug abuse or the mental health. Or, and usually ends up in the dirty home where the children are being taken care of. So it's really a mixture of all of those three things. So when a case goes to court, the parties, which are the parents and the children, they have rights, just like many of the rights that you hear about for criminal cases. The right to counsel, right to contested hearings, cross-examination, present evidence, and then the important one, right to reasonable services. So that means everything from medical, dental, eye vision, therapy, helping them even with, with expenses, helping them with extracurricular activities. So Santa Clara County, and I can only speak for Santa Clara County, we're fortunate that we're able to provide significant resources. In talking to other judges, for example, from LA, they tell me that what they do is they give referrals. We provide them services in Santa Clara County. I can't speak for Alameda, but they do. And we speak through these because I know, as I said, I just want to give you an overview. The court process, the petition is filed, it's served within 48 hours. And I believe I covered these, the jurisdiction, disposition, what are we going to do for them? And then we have hearings, mandatory hearings every 6 months. So that some of these cases last 19 years because the family goes through stages to where the parents said, I don't want your services, I'm not going to do anything. So they go through the process of terminating services, terminating the parental rights, and then if the children don't get adopted, within 3 years, they can come back to court and petition that services start all over. And we have found that it's best to kind of recycle them a second time because perhaps maybe the second time, they will take advantage of the services. Some of these young parents may be older and may be wiser too, so that for those that don't go through the services, we don't prevent them from seeing their children if they're in a legal guardianship or if they are in a foster home. They still continue to have visitation with the children. So like I said, I had some cases that were open 19 years until the child emancipated at 18, but we keep them to 19 if they're in school so that they can finish school. And that's what return child or TPR means, that terminated parental rights. So that, what are some of the outcomes we're looking for? Obviously, in providing services is the reunification of the child and the parents. And we're in a very fast pace. For children that are 2 years and 9 months and 29, let me put it this way, 1 day short of being 3 years, they get to get about 12 months of services. For children, children under the 3 years, 6 months is, where they have to show some significant improvement. Over 3 years, they get 12 months, right? And so that it wasn't uncommon for a parent that was going through their second or third child. I had one case where we had taken 8 children and she was pregnant with her 9th. So that, that in those cases, pretty much we know that they were going to do the 6 months, and after 6 months, inevitably, the parent never went through the services. And so it is a very, very fast track time, and I tell them when they come to court, the clock is ticking. Now, we can give them up to 2 years of services if we see some progress. So that these are the potential outcomes. Either they get returned to the parent, the child is adopted. Adoption usually takes, anywhere between 2 and 3 years. The child is placed in a legal guardianship. Oftentimes, it's with a relative. The child is placed in a foster home, long-term foster care. And when they, if we don't have a home, because oftentimes, issues with children as they grow up, they're so, I can't even begin to, touch about the many issues that these children face. But I can tell you that it's a real clear pattern. For those children that do not get adopted, do not go into legal guardianship, are not with relatives, and are in a stranger's foster home, there's going to be issues in school. They're going to drop out of school. They're going to get into problems with the law, and then they're going to end up in a group home because the individual foster homes aren't going to want them. As this statistics show you, less than 50% of them, for those that stay in long-term foster care, will 50% only graduate from high school, 2% graduate from college. The vast majority are unemployed. And this was, the last survey, I believe they were like in the 25, 30-year-olds that are over 50% were unemployed. 25% in prison, and so many of them homeless. So I gotta tell you, as a judge, I realize we have not done a good job. We have not done right for this children. There's a lot of work to be done. And I'm really glad that this is an area that you all are looking into, because there's a lot of room for improvement. I believe that our county has done a lot of good programs, but we're not there yet. Some of the challenges, I can't tell you as a Latina, I was one of 7 children. So I know how important it was for me to grow up with my brothers and sisters. But so many of these families that are 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 children, there's no way we can ever keep them together. So after suffering the loss of their parents, being removed from the parents, they're removed from siblings also. And I think in talking to them when they're older, and I'm talking about in their 40s, 50s, it seemed that they took the loss of their siblings much harder than the loss of the parents. So that those are some of the challenges for us, finding foster homes that will be of similar culture, similar backgrounds, and the lack of services. With the advent of Prop 36 no longer being funded, we're going to see fewer and fewer places where we can send parents for drug and mental health treatment. So we look at what can we do. I believe that as a judge, I should be more involved. All of the judges should be more involved in the education of children. Because I do believe that, I know in my personal life, it was education that, the reason why I'm a judge now. But for, and I was one of those tough, rebellious, young people. I dropped out of school when I was 15 and ran away with my boyfriend. Didn't work out, but I stayed together long enough to mess up, my education. And I realized how important it is for these, children to have a right to succeed in school. So that one of the programs I'm really proud about is the Middle School Education Court, where we focus specifically on the education of these children. Because it's not surprising to see many of these children, they don't have an interest in school. When all of that stuff is going on in their family, the last thing they're going to do is concentrate in school. They lose not only their home, their familiar surroundings, their family, their siblings, oftentimes placed in different schools, because depending where the foster home is where they're going to go to school, even though we try really hard not to remove them from their school of origin. But these are some of the areas that obviously we should be focusing on. And as young people, young students that, you know, just starting your careers, what can you do? I think what you're doing today, help us get the word out. We need more foster parents. We need more people to adopt, not to go to other countries, but adopt our own. There's plenty of children that are wanting a home. And I think the hardest thing for me was to hold back tears when I asked this, she was about 15, 16-year-old, and I remember asking her as I was closing the hearing, and I said, is there anything else I can do for you? And this young girl looks at me and says, yes, Judge, can you find me a family? I want to be normal, you know, and he broke my heart. But, you know, she's one of many. So I would like to see more people interested in adopting our own. Be a child advocate. I can't tell you how oftentimes many of these children don't have anyone to advocate for them, not in school, not as an individual, but definitely room for, to be a big sister, a big brother, mentor one of them. So many of them need help, tutoring, that it's really hard. I've been fighting school districts with getting them to allocate more funds for tutoring, but it's not, it's not been easy. You know, everybody's suffering from the same lack of resources. Finally, what can the media do? Knowledge. Inform yourself, all right? In the years that I've been in public office, I gotta tell you, whenever there was this, before I became a judge, I was the police auditor, so for the city of San Jose. And so my job was to basically look over the shoulder of the cops in San Jose. So every time there was a questionable shooting, there was something that the media was really, hot after a story, I knew the broadcast media was going to come after a sound out. They weren't going to spend the time really understanding the issue. But if the print media came, I was going to take time to prepare for that interview because I knew they were going to dig deeper. And it's really, for me, I was commenting to Ms. DeSalle that it's really scary for me to see how our newspaper is dwindling, how the number of reporters out there are becoming scarce. And, but I truly believe that it's through public knowledge that we all are held accountable. And I hope that for those of you that are going to be our future journalists or maybe are already, do accurate and honest reporting. I know the times that I read stories of interviews that they did of me, and I was really disappointed. And I went back to the reporter and I said, this is story taken out of context. And I can't tell you how many times the reporter would tell me, I have no control over the headlines. I wrote the story, but my editor wrote the headline. And he sensationalized, though the story didn't hold up to the sensationalism of the headline. That this is where we can all in our own individual professions have integrity and honesty in what we do. So that's my 15 minutes. Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Saar, you're going to do some honest, accurate reporting?
I'm going to take you back to the days of the dinosaurs when we had a real newspaper that was like a big broadsheet and had like big. It's now yellow. And 2008 seems like an eternity. But I thought I would pass around the hard copies of the series I did because as budding journalists and reviewing it like a picture is a lot more powerful than just the words, especially when you can hold it, you can touch it, you get newsprint and wipe your face and get a black smudge. Okay, sorry, I'll stop. I'm a little nostalgic. First of all, I just want to see I want to be as helpful to you as I can because I have a lot to say on, I've covered the debate about opening the foster care courts just as an issue, so I'm kind of familiar with both sides, and I did some catch up today on company time. And I've also spent like 2 years investigating the dependency courts myself as a reporter, so I have the series and the aftermath of the series I'd like to talk about. And then I have my opinions, which I'm going to separate from, obviously, what I end up writing about. But I thought I want to talk to you. Did you guys get a chance to read this or not? Okay, because I don't want to repeat myself. My mother does that all the time, trying not to do it.
Maybe there's a number of people who are not in the class properly, so maybe you could just give like the briefest of synopsis.
The recap.
Yeah.
Okay. But what I thought I would do is also tell you like the aftermath. So if anyone offers the argument that, good, responsible, in-depth, respectable journalism, which I hope is what would be done in these sensitive situations with traumatized kids, that if they argue that it won't have an impact, and it doesn't matter. I'm kind of here to counter that view. Just briefly, I'm an investigative reporter with the San Jose Mercury News, and because I'm the last investigative reporter at the paper, I can't focus narrowly on juvenile justice issues, which I had been doing for the better part of 10 years, covering exposés about the California youth prison system. I did another 3-part series, and the dependency courts, and I'm kind of a little bit more broad in my focus, just because I'm the only one doing kind of the longer term projects. But it's still very near and dear to my heart, and I still stay in touch with a lot of the issues. So this series, we spent, a good solid year reporting, and it was, when I look back on it now, I think it's safe to say that the general public is really familiar with the foster care system. I mean, I think most people know there's kids in foster care, and they're abused and neglected, and that kind of thing. There's social workers. But I mean, even I as a journalist covering foster care, you don't really get that there's actually a court system. And I think if you said dependency court to probably some pretty educated folks in the world, they would be like, what is that, like dependency court? I don't think that's really a common. Do you guys, I don't know, you've had different experiences, but I don't think people really comprehend that there's actually a court system governing every single step, as Judge Guerrero Daly described, of this system. And the fact of the matter is the parent gets a lawyer, the state appoints a lawyer, the state appoints, every parent, the dad, the mom, the kid, the social worker has a lawyer, and all these people meet and present their cases when you bring a kid into the system and when you are hopefully moving them out into a permanent home or stable home. The proponents of opening the juvenile court to the public say that removing a child from their parent is the most powerful thing the state can do, short of putting you on death row, I think it's safe to say. And a system that powerful should not operate in secrecy. That sunshine is pretty essential to any healthy, functioning system, especially one with that much power. And for me to gain access to this court, it required some real persistence. But I think that the judge who you have here today is illustrative of the fact that there's a great, and she'll hopefully talk about this later, as much as there is resistance to opening the courts among many judges, there's also incredible desire. Please come in and tell the story. And when I look back, I did have struggles. In Sacramento, I had to, sign a contract saying I'd pay $10,000 if I exposed any person's identity. I mean, each court I had to kind of negotiate what the terms of my presence would be. Santa Clara County, there was a brand new judge. She was weeks on the bench when I approached her with this request, and she just wasn't ready kind of politically to just take on all the parties and say, I don't care what, she presented it to the attorneys for all the different parties, and they were like, no way, I don't think so. Karen Dessau, forget it. And in her early tenure, she didn't really have, she didn't want to just say, screw all you people, she's coming. But 6 months later, she did, and she basically overrode their objections and said this reporter has free access to the court. She ended up giving me more access than any other judge in Northern California that I approached. And I spent weeks in and out of hearings, and she gave me access to all the court files in the cases. In some courtrooms, I just sat there without court files. In other counties, I was able to read the court documents that accompanied the hearing. That was a trust between myself, a respectable journalist, and the court. And I told them my child would not be exposed, or a parent would not be exposed, neither by name or by identifier. I just said I will use descriptors. I will say someone's wearing a pink scarf because you could have a pink scarf and not be identified. And that would I needed some tools as a journalist to describe people and make you feel them. But I didn't use their names. Although you'll see in my series that there are names of kids, and there is a young person, Zayron Frazier, who's the feature kid on the day 3, and those were not cases I found through my court observation. So we had really strict guidelines. If I used a case, I made my own determination. I went through a youth advocacy group. He agreed to it. I talked to his social workers and his lawyers and make sure he could really handle it and he knew what he was getting into. And pretty much, I've written about foster care for many years, over a decade, and I always try to get a kid in every story I write about, quite frankly. It's always like my personal standard. Like, I don't believe in writing about people without having them have a voice. And so, but if I have the opportunity, if it's a young person that's not of age, either they're freshly emancipated, as you call it, and think about what is the other context we use the word emancipated in. But they're either freshly out of the system and able to consent to an interview, or I will, if I can, make sure I talk to a social worker or attorney or someone just make sure, just get a second opinion, like does a young person really understand the implications and the consequences, and I'm really upfront, really clear, and let them know, and I don't make promises, and I actually will read back their quotes and go over, I wouldn't ever surprise a young person. So there is a really responsible way to cover kids in foster care. And the thing about the courts is that because no one knows, and a watch system, it's amazing how a watch system will alter its behavior. And just the mere presence of me sitting in the courtroom, in some cases, when my first day in Sacramento, the presiding judge of dependency, that opening case where the judge was like, let's go people, let's go, and the hearings were 30 seconds and they were terminating parental rights in a minute, and just racing through the cases. I mean, one of the judges in my story, I think he 125 families in a day, that kind of thing. It was interesting because the longtime presiding, actually commissioner, because Sacramento didn't have any judges in 5 dependency courts. They were all commissioners. And typically you see commissioners and traffic coordinators. So that's kind of the status that dependency is relegated in a lot of jurisdictions. But she came and sat with me like toward the end of that day, because we were going to have lunch, and I think she just sat there and she saw it from my eyes for a moment. And she just said, Karen, I can't believe you saw that. She took a step back, and I think that the major finding of our series was the really, really low quality of representation for both kids and parents, but mainly for parents. Parents who abused and neglected their kids, who the hell cares, right? Well, actually, no. If you're going to take someone's child, do any of you have children? Okay, yay! And I have 4 kids, and it's hard to imagine anyone taking my child, especially if I'm poor and maybe struggling with some addiction and all. That doesn't give anyone away. And it also, as we know, the terrible impacts of foster care as well. So it has to be a really, really good decision, really well backed up. So when you go to these courts and you see when the judge, however well-meaning they may be, their decision is only as good as the quality of information they get. And the quality of information they get is only as good as the legal representation for all the parties, as you know. I mean, Judge Guerrero-Daly and I had a fascinating discussion on our way up here about our experience in criminal court, where you have some top-notch lawyers, and they got it. They are on it. And they can convince you of anything, probably. They have she was talking about just the quality of their exhibits and trial. And, the people representing kids and parents in a lot of cases in dependency court, they have no experience. They're getting paid shit wages, sorry. They have no training a lot of times. They're not encouraged to go to bat. They're just encouraged to submit to what the county council representing the social worker is alleging, and just say, let's just go along with it, and we'll get it. We'll just work with the system. I mean, it's really stacked against them legally. but they also have really inadequate resources there. They don't, many counties, they don't have access to experts. They don't have knowledge about going to the appellate courts. And sadly, they don't meet with their clients often, literally. So you can be a parent who's just lost your kid, you're in court, there's no calendaring in a lot of courts, so you're just like, it's a big cattle call, you're all there. Maybe your kid was taken, I guess within 24 hours, they have to have a hearing, the first hearing, 48 hours. You have a social worker's report with all these allegations, which you're trying to read, if you can read, and if you can read English. And then your attorney just grabs you out of the crowd, and maybe you'll exchange a few words, but then all of a sudden you're in court. I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling to see it in action. And it may sound like a bit of an exaggeration, but my job is to exaggerate. That's what journalists do. Right? Just kidding. It always goes over well with my family. That joke. I'll just really quick, and then I know you guys want. Hopefully, you guys will ask questions. The impact of that series. So there was a day 1, a day 2, and a day 3. And the day 1 story was just about this incredible, overwhelming nature of the court, how the split-second decisions were being made, and many, many judges really came to me in their chambers and said, I don't have enough information to make a good decision. I mean, I didn't have to make this stuff up. It was really the judges who convinced me that I want better quality representation for these parents. I want to know more about what happened. I want more time to think about other options. I want to be more creative in my rulings. You know, but if there's no time and there's no good information, you can't make a good ruling in the best interest of the child. So they were saying this issue of the overwhelmed dependency courts and the inadequate representation is a child's rights issue. It's a best interest of the child issue. And then the day 2 focused on Santa Clara County's unique model of representation. And although Santa Clara County is held up as a model in some instances, we found some poor practices. And then the day 3 focused on kids in court and the importance of their being present, and how, again, a watch system, when a child is present in court, everyone kind of has to step up their game a little bit, I think. And so in terms of after spending a year writing that series and reporting it, I spent a year covering the aftermath. Schwarzenegger passed a law that strengthened the ability for judges to insist that children be offered the opportunity to attend court, and I think that there's been huge changes on the number of kids. In LA, kids generally do attend their hearings, and they have a really good practice around that, but in the rest of the state, horribly inadequate. Kids were not encouraged to come to court, and in many cases they were discouraged from it. Even though my reporting kind of bore out that kids really, if they are treated well and respected, and if the hearing is, if they have time to kind of be involved in it, it's not so rushed, that it can be a really empowering experience for them to speak to the judge, even if they don't get what they want. So that law has seen more young people attending their own hearings. The Santa Clara County Court, literally every single critique that we leveled of the court was upended within a year. There was a commissioner who was sitting in dependency court that there were a lot of serious complaints about, and that person was, I believe, moved to a traffic court assignment. They had 3 departments that went to 4, so more courtrooms meant fewer cases in each, so they could spend more time on each case. That they've now shrunk again, I understand, but that's because the numbers of kids in foster care has shrunk so dramatically, and I know you guys have probably talked about that. The parents' attorneys who were represented by a private for-profit firm that was really cutting corners on their defense the contract was not renewed, and a new team of some of the same attorneys, but they regrouped in a nonprofit. They stepped up their training on appealing cases to the appeals court, and they started hiring more experts and using more social workers with parents, so the parents, lawyers changed hands. And then the other piece of our critique was that we in Santa Clara County we had this highly unusual thing where prosecutors, the district attorney's office was representing children. And that was a very odd arrangement and highly not well regarded because of the fact that prosecutors have a very aggressive adversarial approach and generally are in the vein of prosecuting parents for drug abuse and other kinds of things, when this hearing is much more about trying to bring the family back together. So actually their contract was not renewed either after decades, and there was a nonprofit firm came in to represent the children. So we were quite proud of the outcomes of our series, and sure there were controversial pieces of it, and I'm sure you may have heard about that as well. Some are horribly unpleasant, and I don't know that I'm well enough to share them right now, but on balance I think it was really important. So thank you. Sorry if I went over.
Yeah, dude, no problem. So, what do you guys think? Is anybody gonna jump in first? I mean, Rishi, you look anxious.
There's so many questions.
Go for it.
I had a question to kind of both of you. As much as we want to improve legal representation, I mean, there are always going to be situations where representation isn't as adequate or isn't as good as we'd hope. How can we empower judges to say, looking at the facts, I don't have enough facts to really make an adequate decision on behalf of this children and parent? Is there any way a judge can say, not enough facts have been given to me, I need either more time or more information before making a ruling on the situation?
Sure. And I gotta tell you, as a judge, flags went up when everybody's agreeing, everybody's admitting. And first thing I would, turn to the minors attorney and say, you're submitting? And I'm like, really? And so, I don't have to agree to endorse their agreements. And, send the social worker back to get more information. I saw this drastically when I started to look at implementing. It's the first education-specific court in the country for middle school children. And before, I would see maybe a sentence at the most, a little paragraph that said, the children are in school. That was it. Right. Now, I get 2 and 3 pages full. I get to see grades, attendance, tardiness, right? I get interviews with the teachers. I see all their STAR test results. And I'm starting to compare, especially if these children are in foster care with foster parents. Why are the children late? Why are they not in school? If they're not doing well, what have you been doing? Who's the advocate? Children have a right to have, if the parents aren't able to advocate for them, then oftentimes I would transfer the educational rights to the foster parent, whoever was going to advocate for this child, or their CASA, Child Advocates, a wonderful organization. But absolutely, we have the ability. Oftentimes, I think, Karen just said, it's a matter of, you can only do so much. If you have, when I started, I had about 600 cases, right? That's way more than is humanly possible to really spend any quality time. And so, but things can be done. Yeah. It's just, where are priorities? And let me make it real clear, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of Santa Clara County. I'm not speaking on behalf of the presiding judge, but, I believe that, that there should have been more judges assigned to dependency and not have in excess of maybe 200, 250 cases at the most, in order to really put quality time into those cases.
Yeah. If we are trying to, as journalists, come in and shed light on the court system, do you have any tips for us of how to approach you or how to approach other judges to make it easier to get access to case files, or what we need to ask for and who we need to ask for different things?
Well, remember that right now, courtrooms are closed, and it's to protect the privacy interest of the child, all right? So that I know in working with middle school, there were people that wanted to come and observe, and the attorneys for the minors were very guarded about that. This is, it's unheard of. It's remember, systems don't change that fast. And so that it took me a while to convince some of the minors attorneys to say, look, these are some community members. They'd like to come and observe. In fact, one time I had a work news reporter, sat in through some of the middle school hearings. But as judges, we have the ability to make a determination whether to allow the spectators to come and observe. Normally, we try and get the buy-in from the lawyers, but as far as you wanted to come and cover a story, now let me also put it out there. I am not as let's open all the courts and let everybody come in. I'm not there. Okay, I do believe that there needs to be more light shone in the courtrooms, because I do believe that we all, do a better job. We're more sensitive. When we know people are looking. It's a given in any profession, right? But I do also believe that there are those cases where I'm not going to agree to re-traumatize a child for the sake of, people sitting there and observing. And I'm talking about cases of incest. I'm talking about, rape. I'm talking about, those kind of cases where, I see, the children literally fall apart just having to, and oftentimes it is before or after the criminal case has gone through. So, like I said, I'm not, a supporter of 100% cases, open them. But I am in support of, there's many cases that I think we would do more good than harm. And yet there are those that I feel there would be more harm than good if they were open to the public.
I was wondering, obviously you were able to do some really thoughtful and important pieces that did lead to a big change, but I'm curious if the courts were to be opened and more journalists were to come to it without the same level of understanding or thoughtfulness, what that could look like. And I was wondering what you were thinking might be some possible ways to ensure that journalists who come into that system would be prepared or be able to cover the stories in a way that's appropriate.
Right. Well, I did a little bit of homework this morning, and just to update myself. And so 47% of kids in foster care in this country are going through open courts, presumptively open courts. And all the big states, Florida, Texas, Illinois, and now LA.
Where'd you get the 47% number?
Let's see. Missouri, Washington State, and on all the top 5 cities, all the largest big cities except for Philadelphia right now. So, there's a little bit of a dispute in Connecticut because of a law professor in LA, and that's controversial. But yeah, but there has pretty much not been the fear mongering about, oh my God, all these crazy bloggers are going to come in, and they're going to our courtrooms will be flooded with journalists. I think there's been, if anything, it's been kind of like totally underwhelming. I've talked to judges in other states about this, and I think there's actually been on the contrary, a disappointment. Wait, I thought we were going to get some attention, good, bad, or otherwise. And if you guys are at all familiar with the state of the media, we can barely even cover the criminal courts. Personally, I think we do too much criminal court coverage, but with the state of most media, with major media organizations, being as understaffed as they are, and the fact that, I've been a social services reporter for a couple decades, but I don't even know papers that, it's so few papers that even have a social services or juvenile justice dedicated reporter anyway. That's not like a BBC in every newsroom like City Hall. So the fact that the idea that all of a sudden all this interest is going to be created by these hearings, I think it's really highly unlikely. And I think that if you actually understand the terms on which journalists can come in, it's not what you think. You can't even be that irresponsible with it because you're not getting the files. The legislation that was proposed in California was, first of all, the judge's discretion to not have the hearing open. So if he felt the child would be traumatized, he would weigh that, or she would weigh that. You could not see the file. You cannot reveal the identity. Those would be the terms upon which you could enter the court. If a journalist came in under those terms and reveal the identity of the child, that journalist would never go back in court, or the court would be closed. You know, I mean, it wouldn't work. And I think also for those of you who are journalism students, you know that we, media organizations have had rules in place forever about sexual assault victims, adult or child, and about child victims, period. We don't identify them, and we don't. I mean, there are exceptions that you all know about, but I think the kind of irony of this discussion about dependency court for me is that if a case is so big that the media is going to be clamoring to cover it, it's going to be in criminal court, right? Because the cases that we're talking about every day in an afternoon, 85% are neglect. These are kids who went to school hungry, they didn't earn food, they were left alone, no one picked them up after school. I mean, surprisingly pretty mundane, horrifying, and sad, and tragic stuff, but it's not like gang rapes of babies and stuff. Those cases are going to be in criminal court, and then there's no privacy at all, and there never has been. So, I mean, I guess that's the thing I always think about. If you weigh it against the way the media work in criminal court for the most part, we don't identify. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I'm writing about, right now I'm doing a project on court-appointed conservators of the elderly and disabled, fiduciaries and trustees. And well, what am I saying? This is on camera and everything. Is this just between us, right?
Well, no.
Oh, okay, never mind.
You don't want to talk about it?
Well,
You think you're going to be
I
spooked?
think I probably won't talk about it, yeah, actually. But I'm just saying that, like, even in cases where decades have gone by, we're still not named, we're still doing the John Doe thing.
You know, I wanted to, I didn't finish giving you the answer to your question. There is a process by which every courtroom, as a journalist, you
I
can
was just
go
explaining
and-
that to her right now.
and fill out the form. Here's the problem we're having now is, how do we know who, if, let's say that you write for a blog. Before, it was just a newspaper, it was easier. But nowadays, that line has been blurred. While I'm sure the Mercury News has, certain, policies and procedures that Karen has to follow. What about that other media? How do we, in any way, who do we go to? Who do we see? And that is where a lot of the uneasiness is coming from. Also, for me as a judge, because it's not for us to go and question, are you really a reporter? Are you really, let me see your credentials? I don't know if there's is there a license to be a reporter? Does the state license you, or?
No.
All right, so what, how do we distinguish who is and who is not a reporter? With social media, a child that will probably not be hearing about another friend in school, reading about the paper, is probably going to look at Facebook in one of those and see a story about themselves. That's, those are some of the areas how it's changed. This, whole, social networks have really changed, how communications and information gets out there. So that's what we're still wrestling with.
So it happens, and as a judge, it's brought to your attention by the child's lawyer. What power do you have? Can you pull that person back in and hold them in contempt of court, or
For what?
if they were to broadcast something in your court but haven't gotten express permission from the judge that's serving on that trial? If I was to be, when I was at ABC, if I was to report on something just as a regular member of the community, that was not going to be allowed.
Well, there's laws.
Yeah.
And there's sanctions. There's real penalties,
Yeah.
fines and jail, that if you violate and you report on information that is confidential and it's you're told you cannot, well, yeah. We can go into the area of
Could you
Don't
also
piss
get-
her off, I'm warning you.
Can that person's Facebook post, can you have that retracted because it's letting confidential information out from like a
I
minor?
think as Karen will tell you, putting the genie back in the bottle. is-
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look, these arguments were being made before Facebook, so you can kind of see that there's a new argument every era,
What's really interesting though about this contempt issue is that in some of those states where they have presumptively open clinics, they've included this contempt clause. So if you were to go ahead and use identifiers, then the judge can hold you in contempt, which I think is kind of like
an elegant way to let somebody in. You know, you let them in with like the $10,000. How did they come up with $10,000?
I don't know, it's very nice.
You're a journalist.
I just made sure the company would pay.
You know, I would like an area that I don't know how much work is being done, and that is asking the children, how do they feel about it? Because I can tell you, some of the comments that I hear from them is, Judge, can you have the social worker not come to my school? I want to feel normal. I don't want to be pulled out of school because they tell me my social worker's there. Or when the social worker comes, can you have them not bring a marked car because they're going to know that, you know, that I'm different? You know, all of that is something that we need to look at because really it's their privacy interest. How do they, you know, and I don't know that anybody's done it.
Well, I can comment a little bit.
Okay, good.
So I actually just did a little review with my people, my sources today, and so these have been the most compelling arguments that have made the legislation to open the courts in California most recently dead in the water. Is the appearance, as you see in one of my stories of this, the California Youth Connection, this foster care advocacy group coming out strongly in opposition to this legislation and coming up, insisting on some amendments that were seen as so extreme that there's no way. I mean, in essence, what they wanted is they wanted the kids to be able to decide whether the hearing should be open or closed, which would actually have given them more power than the judge, and made the law more restrictive than it is today, actually, because today the judge does have the power, and if that amendment to this bill would have passed. It's a really interesting and fascinating issue, and you know, I just spoke with, I think Jennifer Rodriguez is one of your panelists, or I'm not sure if you're going to hear from her this year.
Yeah, so was a board member.
I was a board member. Okay, so I mean, I was just talking to her a bit ago, and you know, she grew up in foster care, and she's the executive director of the Youth Law Center now, so she has kind of all perspectives. And she was in my series, and I know she's been a huge champion of the kind of work I've done, but she's just too moved by all the years of hearing from kids that they just feel that it would be disrespectful and invasive to them, and that when you're in crisis, you want it to happen in private, like a doctor's visit. And these are certainly arguments that have moved a lot of people. And I think that when Judge Nash and Judge Edwards in Santa Clara County, who opened his court up to anyone who was interested for decades, and as he likes to say, he never ever had someone come back and say it was a bad experience. They feel, and it's an awkward place to be, but they feel like, just like in criminal court, the victims, as sympathetic as we are with them, they don't get to decide how the judicial process goes. That there's something called the rule of law in this governing system that has to function in a certain way. That, you know, if victims of criminal cases could decide the way the whole thing was set up, that probably wouldn't be, you know, constitutional. And they have been in this really difficult predicament. And I know the Assemblyman Mike Pure, who's the last legislator to try and get the open courts bill passed in California, I mean, it was horribly disheartening to him. He tried very hard to woo this very powerful foster care group to come to his side and to support the bill. And in the end, it was very difficult to oppose them because it's very hard to, when you have kids themselves who've been in foster care say, we don't want exposure. I personally can only speak from my experience, and I know that, you know, I think it's safe to say that, and I check back with them, and I, you know, I've asked, you know, stayed in touch with the folks I've interviewed, and I've come back and interviewed them again, and I think for the most part, if they know they're so used to being abused and mistreated and not heard from, that in my experience, kids having a voice and a role in what's said and done about their lives is actually kind of the opposite. It's a really strengthening experience for them. And we may be talking about little kids and babies and all kinds of things, but we do have to remember that the reporting in these courts would not, the point is that you do not identify the children. And I would like to think that, and I would like to encourage you as journalists and maybe as the social welfare people and public policy people dealing with this issue in the future, is to remember that we're not looking for just crazy random cases that sound really horrifying, but we're looking for systemic issues that society needs to know about, and that's my guiding factor. So I think that that's why when you can present yourself to a judge or trying to convince the social services department to let you in, that your goal is really a larger systemic issue that you believe needs to be revealed and not just a sensationalistic case.
There's 2 questions.
So, do you have something to say?
Yes, I just want to say, as a former foster youth myself, opening up these dependency courts is really, hard for the youth. A lot of times the youth don't have so much say in the court system because of fear, because they're intimidated of the court process. It can be many issues why the youth can, be scared to speak up in the court. Because you got the lawyers, you got the judge sitting there, you got the social worker, you got the parents, you got the foster parents. I mean, there's so many players in the courtroom that makes the youth feel uncomfortable. So, by opening up these courts, as I can only speak by experience, only makes the child a victim. We have these criminal procedures, and we want to talk about fixing the foster care system. You don't fix the foster care system by opening it up to the media. And like, Karen said, you have these court systems that's already open. Nobody want to come and videotape, go in and report on these stories. I mean, they go unheard, continue to go unheard. So if you want to talk about fixing the foster care system, let's talk about the deficiencies in the systems that are not in place to help these children and these youth. We want to talk about, I think the judge made a good point about mentors and CASA workers. I mean, the youth need some sort of guidance. I think that foster parents, I think that, when we want to talk about family reunification, we want to look at if the family or the parent is able to take care of the child. I mean, you have, in my case, my father was on drugs, and he was an alcoholic. And, he used drugs for years. And, you don't want to reunify children to go with an abusive parent like that. I mean, I don't care if the parent go through rehabilitation for a year. Because there's a habit, and it still occurs. And it's difficult for youth to endure that type of experience and traumatizing experience, and having been moved around for so many times. We have a new law, that really allows for youth to be at the school of origin. I think that helps, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of deficiencies and flaws in the court system and in the social services.
I'll challenge this, right? So, so in a sense, we were discussing this before, right? And I hear exactly what you're saying, Soko, and I empathize with the position. And I'm not taking a position here. I'm just saying, at what point, what would give the youth, because that's what matters, right? The trust in the media to do what Karen did with those stories, which you could argue help kids down the line, right? Do you think there is a place for that? Or do you think that you'd rather understand the potential benefit versus the potential cost, you'd rather just keep it how it is?
Well, let them be let the youth be the decider about whether they want to publicize their story to the media. I mean, Karen, I think she did a step that she made to go and talk with Zeron about if he wanted to expose his court case to the public. I think that that's his own decision. He was at a certain age, probably he's at 15 or 16 years old, where he felt comfortable to share the story to the media. I mean, it really depends, but going through case files, I mean, that's very confidential. I mean, the judge can speak to this, but that's very confidential. You have a very explicit information in these files that I don't think that people should be, that don't have the right to look at these files, shouldn't be looking at these files.
To give you an example, one thing that comes up really often, and it's very awkward, and I can't even imagine the humiliation is, the first thing I do in the first hearing is I ask, because he shows the mother that's there, who's the father? Because I need to establish legal rights. And if the child is there, and for the mother to answer, I don't know. It could be so-and-so, or it could be so-and-so. So we have what is called alleged fathers. Picture that child, even in a hearing, as simple, not getting into any of the real allegations, but just being in a setting where you're hearing your mother say, I don't know, it could be so-and-so, A, B, or C. I don't know. To me, I just, I cringe. As much as I want to have the children in courtroom, and I encourage them to be in court. And I was telling Karen that one of the things I did during my term there was I'd buy gift certificates for them. So, I'd go to Target until one of the child told me, I don't like the clothes at Target. Can you buy different kind of gift certificates? And I started giving them. Everybody that came to court, they would get a gift certificate from me. And you'd be surprised how all my kids would be coming because, there was an incentive. But anyway, just I wanted to throw that out there.
I just want to say one thing. I mean, it's interesting how all this focus gets paid to the journalists being traumatizing the children. I mean, you got to remember, like, kids bounce between 10, 15, 20, 25 homes in the foster care system. It's in some cases taking the back of police cars to children's shelters. They're taken to court with no explanation, or they're not taken to court, not giving. I mean, there's so many ways that kids are abused in the system. I think that's probably safe to say. So, I think in the grand scheme of things, having an observer in the courtroom to make sure that the system was serving them, and someone who was not identifying them, in the grand scheme of all these kids thinking to survive, is probably not. It's interesting for the system who's treated them harshly in so many ways to turn around and suddenly say, "Oh, it's the journalist." But someone behind, you had
yeah. My question is, once a child is removed because of a court order, how often is that case reviewed? And if there is, could a child ask for the case to be reviewed?
Absolutely. For me, I would see cases about every 3 months. And at first, when all of the different hearings are, because remember that in the span of, on an average, parents get about 18 months of services. And at every stage, they have a right to contest it. So they have a right to a trial, right? So unlike other cases that the trial is the last thing that happens, after the trial, somebody wins, somebody loses. Here, at every stage, they have a right to a trial, all right? In the 2.5 years that I was there, I did 159 trials. So that, yes, and that child has a lawyer that is, with them throughout. As long as there's a case that's open, that child's going to be represented by a lawyer. So some, like with the middle school, I saw them, sometimes once a month, sometimes more. If I was trying to reunify the parent that was no longer in the picture, I'll tell you a real quick story. I had this little girl that she was a gifted child, but because she was 13, had been in 11 different homes. And so I agree with what Karen says. The system, also abuses and exposes and hurts these children. No doubt about it. I'm not saying that that's not the case. And so found out that she qualified to be in middle school, and she was doing real well. Suddenly she dropped off. Didn't want to get out of bed. Didn't want to go to school. Didn't know why. Well, her mother was no longer reunifying with her. But as a child, you never stop loving your parent or wanting to go home. So found out that mom was heavy into drugs. Brought her in, did a little mini drug court just for her. So every Friday, I would have her there. I would, go over treatment, go over, get her into housing, get her stabilized, get her clean. So by the time I left, this little, 13-year-old was back home with mother because the case was reopened. We gave her services again. She cleaned up her act, and she went home after 13 years because she was like about a year when she first was removed. So, there are things that can be done. And personally, I do welcome more involvement from the press in systemic changes. And, you know, and you know, if I was still in dependency court and Karen came and said, I would like to explore, why are children truant if they are in foster homes? I would say, go for it, you know. I just have still reservations on an individual case without the buy-in from the child.
I was,
Do you mind, because these two have had their hands up?
And also, just as a note, we're gonna be ending in 5 minutes, which it sucks, I know, but this always happens, we just, everything condenses down and then it just starts to get, and then we'll let it go. But anyway, go ahead, sorry,
Okay, I have a question for both of our speakers, and it's about the dependency court as the Cinderella of the judicial system. And if she's the Cinderella, then the civil and criminal courts are the sisters who are well fed and well cared for, while Cinderella is sleeping in the woodshed and being fed very thin gruel. Why do we not hear more about this from the judges and other players in this system? I'm confident that if the criminal courts, judges, and lawyers who are sleeping in the woodshed and being fed thin gruel, we would hear plenty about it from the judges and from the lawyers, likewise from the civil courts. Why not hear it?
I agree, and I'll tell you, I'm not the presiding judge, but if I was, I would allocate more judges to dependency cases, not less. I would have not reduced it to 4, you know, I mean to 3.
Well,
And then go to 4.
in the Cinderella story, the well-fed sisters are evil and selfish. I have no reason to think that is true of our civil and criminal court judges. Why are they not advocating for the dependency court?
Part of it because, as I told you earlier, even as a judge, I have very little knowledge about dependency. If you ask most law students, they never heard of dependency. It's not even a subject covered in law school. So even though if you're in it, you think everybody really knows about it, but not really. You hear the commercials, the what is that mattress factory that
Sleep Train.
Sleep Train. All right. So you've heard the word foster children, but I think the knowledge that most people have is very, very superficial. And it took me 2.5 years to really start to understand it, and I still don't understand it all. But as I said, even as a judge, I was not familiar with the subject area.
Stephanie, last quick one.
Yeah, I really liked what you were saying about wanting kids in court and that area for the gift cards. What other things do you think the court should be doing, or policy we should be doing to increase kids' participation in court and their level of comfort and accessibility?
I know that with the middle school, one of the things I would do is I would bring them into chambers. I would not be wearing a robe. I would bring them to chambers, a one-on-one, and their lawyer. Obviously, their lawyer had to be there. But because I cannot, as a judge, have ex parte communications with one of the parties, and remember, all the parents are parties too, the county's a party, I would put the speakerphone on, and I was still complying with the law, but I had one-on-one with a child. And I say, I would tell them, I'm your judge. By the time they left, I told them, who am I? You're my judge, all right? To be able to have that kind of a one-on-one relationship with a child, so that later as we went into open courtroom, it wasn't as scary. It wasn't, and I would ask them, do you know that, I have an obligation that you're my responsibility as far as making sure that you graduate from school? Do you know that you have a pot of money for you to go to college? No, Judge, I didn't know. Yeah, there's a pot of money for you to go to college. Informing them more, building that rapport, that one-on-one communication. But in order to do that, we need time.
Maybe we get one last minute, and you get it out. Yeah, good. Ask the question, and then we have to cut because these other people are rushing in, unfortunately.
Okay. I noticed a very interesting phenomenon. For the judge, your purpose is to reunite families. For the journalist, your purpose is to do a good story. For the social workers, their purpose is to protect the kids, the children from the abuse cases. So, does these 3 kind of purposes conflict with each other? No, I don't think so. But my question is, why the judge and the social workers don't see the good sides of the journalist's work? I just think the journalist can be paid to do a good story, and it's their work is not to just because they are curious about the practices of these children. So why don't you look at the good side of the values of the journalist work and cooperate with them instead?
Well, like I said, I don't, there's many judges that don't, but I can tell you, I've had enough interaction with the press that I can see the benefits. However, I ran for office, all right? I was elected. The majority of the judges get appointed. So their involvement, with being, having their names and stories and, and I see the process. If you do something wrong, friendship goes out the window. You're going to be exposed, to its ugliness and, it's their job to do that.
Yeah.
All right?
But
So a lot of judges are afraid, or not, I'm not going to say afraid, they're not comfortable dealing with the press. And so I think that's an area that we need more training in order to see that, they're a tremendous tool for us to get the word out. Because we're always wanting help for the court. We want more resources. But unless you realize what a valuable, I couldn't pay to have a story, one of those, and get the word out there. You never have enough money to be able to do that. I know the value of being able to have a story, being able to have them come in and say, because they're going to highlight what we're doing wrong and also what we're doing right. As I told you, Santa Clara County, we are a model court, but we still have a lot of growth to do. But people wouldn't know, they would be lumping us with every other, county that's not doing a good job if Karen hadn't written a story about it. So believe me, we don't feel like we don't know or appreciate or want them in our courts. It's just the how. We need to establish, the ground rules, and that's where we're at this point.
Well, we'll work on that in this class and beyond. But thank you so much for coming.